back to work.
I'm employed, baby.
COVID testing and vaccination clinics are helping Colorado reopen, while opening doors for laid-off Coloradans eager to get back to the job.
Plus, justice for all.
Too often, we bury our heads in the sand.
Denver reveals some white criminals get better treatment than blacks or Latinos who commit the same crime. Everyone wants to fix it, but they can't agree on how.
We need public safety officers who treat everyone as a human being.
And tonight we are bringing you a special 360 report on fairness. You will hear from people pushing for change in the legal system and people seeking fairness in our schools.
You'll also hear from some people who believe the system's fine as is, and others who believe inequity starts during the hiring process. And they have some solutions to create a fairer system in the future.
And we begin tonight with Denver7's Russell Haythorne.
It is our duty to win!
In a close examination of race and bias in the Denver DA's office, DA Beth McCann touting a new study.
The study found no pervasive issues of racism, bias, or implicit bias in the office.
Yet the same study did show a, quote, persistent set of disadvantages for blacks and Hispanics charged with felonies, which seems to contradict the DA's overarching message.
There is a discrepancy, and people of various races and ethnicities do have different outcomes.
The study shows among cases that were dismissed, white defendants were twice as likely to have their cases deferred as black or Hispanic defendants. And in drug felony cases, white defendants were more likely to go to a more lenient drug court, whereas a higher percentage of black and Hispanic cases went to district court.
Whites are still being overrepresented in drug court as opposed to going through the normal court system.
Brother Jeff Farrard says the systemic disparities in criminal justice are deep-seated.
What's interesting is that this topic has now, I believe, begun to get the attention that it deserves.
While he commends the DA for allowing the study,
the other side of that is blacks are overrepresented in terms of arrests and perhaps filings, etc.
Advocates for criminal justice reform, like Dr. Robert Davis, say the study is, at the very least, an honest examination of a system still broken.
Too often, we bury our heads in the sand. The reality of the matter is, we have all of these internal biases and things that were put into us just from growing up.
It takes courage in a world that we're in now in social reckoning to say we still have work to do, but we also have celebration.
How do you get to the root of systemic bias within the criminal justice system and have a system that has at least equitable outcomes?
Russell Haythorne, Denver7.
And this issue is not limited to our courts. Black students in Colorado are more likely to get arrested, ticketed, or face harsh discipline. This according to state data first published in Chalkbeat.
Now, Colorado Democrats tried to address this disparity this year. Their proposal would have banned police officers from handcuffing elementary school students. It would also have stopped officers from arresting or ticketing students for certain offenses.
The bill didn't get anywhere. Police unions and other law enforcement groups said they wouldn't be able to do their jobs if these restrictions were to go into effect. And in a Denver Post editorial, conservative attorney Dan Kaplis claimed it would embolden and empower the bullies, sex offenders, thieves, perverts, and other lawbreakers who already disrupt the learning process and who cause far too many students to dread going to school each day.
All right, so far we have focused on the way police, lawyers, and judges treat people of color, but we haven't talked about why so many people in those positions are white. Now, of the 1,200 DAs and public attorneys in our state, 93% are white, even though whites only make up 68% of the population. This is according to a Denver Post analysis from last July. Now, things are just slightly better on the state Supreme Court, 2 of the 7 seats held by Latinos, but there hasn't been a black justice in 2 decades. Now, at the county level, it can be much, much worse. For instance, Pueblo County, 43% Latino there. Every single district court judge is white.
And experts we spoke to for this report call it a pipeline problem. The racial makeup of law schools skews white. According to a 2019 report, white students made up 76% of the law school students in Colorado, despite only representing 68% of the population. And these numbers are after 3 decades of progress. Experts believe there was single-digit minority law school enrollment in Colorado in the late 80s. And many of Colorado's police departments are trying to address equity concerns as well. In Aurora, a 2020 analysis found the police academy Police Academy was only accepting 1% of qualified black applicants compared to more than 4% of qualified white applicants. Police Chief Vanessa Wilson has taken steps to make those numbers more equitable.
We aren't always going to be perfect, and we need to be held accountable when we aren't, and I get that, and I promise that.
But it's fair to say every department needs to do better about hiring officers who are not white. Recent data shows white people are overrepresented on every large police force in the state, and Latinos are underrepresented on every force. Now, we have given you several perspectives to consider, so now we want to hear what you think. What's your perspective on this? Email us at 360@thedenverchannel.com, and be sure and join us at 6 o'clock when we take a closer look at the way state leaders are wanting to level the economic playing field across all races.
The family of Boulder shooting victim Ricky Olds held a celebration of her life today in Boulder. Ricky, a manager at the King Soopers on Table Mesa, was described as an outgoing friend who didn't waste much energy on what people thought of her. She was 25 years old. The public defender representing the alleged shooter wants the case moved out of Boulder and the prosecution banned from talking about it publicly. Both motions were entered in court today. The defense says information becoming public then could taint the jury pool and force the judge to move the case out of Boulder. The DA has about 2 weeks to respond. He has promised to bring the community regular updates on the process, but also claims he's going to be very careful about what he reveals publicly.
Today, someone likely received the 3 millionth dose of the vaccine given in Colorado. As of last night, 2.9 million doses had been given out, and close to 20% of our state is now fully vaccinated. Nationwide, about 42% of people have received at least one dose of the vaccine. Among teachers, school staff, and child care workers, 80% of people have gotten at least one dose. Of course, we're in for a long fight.
Even moving at the record speed we're moving at, we're not even halfway through vaccinating over 300 million Americans.
The U.S. has not slowed the pace of deaths associated with COVID. 21 states, including Colorado, are reporting an increased number of deaths just in the last week. The CDC says many recent outbreaks are tied to youth sports and extracurriculars. And we're seeing it here in Colorado. A community college science lab and a youth lacrosse team here in Colorado are among the people and places blamed for outbreaks this past week.
And we're not done with the COVID dial just yet. Jeffco will join most other Front Range counties in level yellow starting Friday. Now, county officials blame an increase in cases. Most places and events will now be subject to 50% capacity limits, and masks, of course, will be required at all indoor public spaces. Many of the gig workers who lost their jobs because of COVID found a new job because of COVID, helping us all return to normal.
As you get vaccinated, know that many who are helping you through that process are thankful for their shot. Denver7's Gary Brode reports.
Everything working on your system, everything's all good to go?
Perfect. A means to an end.
The more we're doing this, the harder we work on this, the sooner we can get back to normality.
When you drive up to the state's mass vaccination site in Commerce City, you'll see workers wearing masks, directing you through the line. Behind the mask is a story of loss. Many of them, like Allie McGee, were once gig workers.
We have the lighting guy for one of my favorite bands here that works for me.
When the pandemic started, the music stopped.
Just like that, they all started dropping like flies, one at a time, and before I knew it, my life, my career, everything I had identified with, everything I had worked for the last 7 years, literally just disappeared in front of my eyes.
Like many, McGee and others here had to adapt to survive.
We all came from the same community and we've all shifted into this together.
Everyone's still crushing it no matter
John Pendergrass comes from that community. Until this opportunity came around, the former gig worker was unemployed for most of the pandemic.
We're fortunate enough to be in the roles that we're in now that we have brought on a lot of music people that were in the same boats as us that otherwise would have nothing.
While it's not the industry they love, the similarities between their old job and their current one are there.
There's not much of a difference there. It's a bunch of people waiting in line to get through, and instead of seeing music here, they're getting a shot in the arm.
With each shot comes one more step to the job that was taken from them more than a year ago.
I feel like the more people we get through now, the faster we do this job, the faster I can get back to do what I love most.
In Commerce City, Gary Brode, Denver7.
Unlike yesterday, the weather screen is clean. No snow to worry about tonight.
Plus, Fort Collins makes good on a proposal to ban plastic bags.
And scammers sink their claws into one Colorado man and end up with $11,000 of his money. Why, he says Wells Fargo shares some blame.